Hey, and welcome to the Leniverse. I am Leni, and this is a much overdue update on my reading of the Women's Prize for Fiction longlist. Easter and the long school holidays have slowed things down, especially when it comes to making videos. But I have 3 books to talk about. Very soon I will also have another video where I discuss 3 books, only one of which is on the long list, but all 3 are by Karen Lord. And I will discuss whether you actually need to read all 3 or if the long listed book is a standalone. The books are 8 Lives of a Century-Old Trickster, Soldier Sailor, which I have on my Kindle, and The Maiden. So, going in the order with which I read them, let's start with 8 Lives of a Century-Old Trickster by Miranay Lee. Parts of this book, like certain chapters of this book, have previously been published as short stories, and it shows. Don't get me wrong, they're all part of the same narrative, but this is a novel that's very episodic, and it also jumps back and forth in time. The author has also chosen to employ a frame story that I find rather superfluous. It actually reminds me a lot of the kind of writing convention that you had in Victorian novels, where the book starts with a letter along the lines of, "My dear friend, I am sorry for my prolonged silence, but you will not believe what has happened to me. I went up on the Wuthering Heights, and there I met this really strange family who told me the most gruesome story of obsession and death." And then, of course, follows the actual story at a length which is absolutely ridiculous to consider in a handwritten letter. And that's kind of what happens here as well, even though the narrator comes back, or the letter writer or whatever, actually the obituary writer in this case, does return in the end, not just to say, "and that's all for now, my dear friend," but to actually tie up some loose ends. But it is a stylistic choice that I still find a bit strange. So in the prologue, you meet this woman who works as an accountant, I think, in a home for the elderly. And she decides, for various reasons that they go into in great detail about her personal life, which also has nothing to do with the rest of the story, that she wants to talk to the old people, let them tell their story, let them have a say in how they want to be remembered, and then she will write their obituaries. And there is no good reason for this character or this project that I can see. Might as well have had just the main character here decide to write her memoirs or tell her story to someone without, this whole framing device. The framing device also doesn't make sense because when we get to the first episode in here about the main character's life, it's not actually told from her point of view. It's told from the point of view of a random teenage boy who happens to have some interactions with her. So it doesn't make sense for the old woman herself to be telling the story like this, with inside detailed information about his thoughts and his family life. And it also doesn't make any sense for the obituarist biographer to do it in this way either. So the only reason I can see for this point of view is that that's how it was written when it was a standalone short story. And while the choice of another person to write the biography does make some sense at the end, at the epilogue, it's still not really a choice that I agree with or liked, because I spent so much of this book wondering, why did they have that prologue there? What was the point? I kind of expected there to be a discussion between the old woman and the obituary writer in between each chapter, maybe, where they're discussing things, and the obituary writer is deciding whether or not to believe the woman. But that doesn't happen. We just jump back and forth in time through various episodes of her life in a kind of detail that I find a bit surprising. Now, as to the stories themselves, they are very well written, but oh boy, they are a lot. The first few stories, I mean, I don't really like to give content warnings because sometimes the content can actually be, or that warning can be a spoiler, but in this case, it's just a necessity. In the first few stories, basically, practically anything that you can think of that is done to women during times of war and upheaval, they happen. If you can imagine things that don't happen in here, then just don't tell me about it, because I don't need that in my head. In addition, in the first few stories, practically every male character you come across, with the exception of the teenage boy from the first story, and there's also mention of some priests who are teaching them, or have set up a school, and they seem like decent people. But except for that, they are all terrible, horrible excuses for human beings. Whether it's brutal and ignorant Korean husbands and fathers, or Japanese soldiers, or American soldiers, or even medical personnel, they are just all awful. So the first few stories, they are a lot. But I don't feel that it becomes exploitative. It doesn't linger. There's just too much happening, too much going on. The stories move along. But it is worth keeping in mind that there's a lot of just torture and awfulness in the first parts of this book. The main character, though, she is definitely the definition of you're not a victim, you're a survivor. She is one badass survivor. And it is quite impressive and enjoyable to see how in the later parts of the book she just takes control of her life and her destiny and just manages to live on her own terms, even in North Korea. And here we now finally also meet several male characters who are actually good people, which was kind of nice as well. So my overall verdict of this book is approach with caution. It is a debut, and I will definitely be keeping an eye on this author, whether she writes a collection of short stories or another novel next. I am likely to read it, although I really hope that she doesn't write another just set of short stories that she then crams together into a novel. I'm not entirely convinced of this book as a Women's Prize long-listed book. I would be very surprised if it ends up on the shortlist. Not just because of the structural issues, but also because I just had trouble suspending disbelief in this book. Everything that happens here, yes, I am sure they did happen. All of it. To any number of people. But I don't think that all of this ever happened to one person. That just doesn't seem possible or probable. And of course, the biographer also has her doubts as she's listening to this. But it's all right. It tells a story of the kind of things that did happen. It tells a story of several wars and decades. And the main character becomes almost sort of an avatar taking us through all these episodes. It does make it a little bit too disjointed, a bit too strange. Okay. Next, I read a book that I had been actively dreading. And that book is Soldier Sailor by Claire Keegan. I had been told that the book was basically sort of stream of consciousness, where you are stuck in the head of a mother of a newborn who is suffering postpartum depression and who is sleep deprived, and that it reads basically like a panic attack. Now, I have lived that, and my head was not a nice place to be in at that time. I would not wish that on anybody else, and I do not wish to be in anybody else's head, even a fictional character, vicariously living that. That said, when I did read the book, it's actually one of my favorites so far. It is both as intense and not as bad as I expected. The first few chapters are really intense, but then it does level out a bit, giving you a chance to breathe. It also becomes a bit excessively bad. So while there were so many points of identification for me there, it was also a bit like, this is so bad now, and her husband is so useless, and there are clearly nobody else around. There are no grandparents, like nobody. And she was just so much of a perfectionist about everything that it struck me that this is not really sustainable. Obviously, the point of the book is that it isn't sustainable, but also, again, a case of all of this is correct, but there's just too much of it. And that allowed me to get a little bit of distance. Now, if you have children, I guarantee you that there are bits here that you will recognize, feelings that you will recognize, episodes that you will recognize. If you don't have children, if you're expecting a child, maybe read this book, maybe not, but definitely give it to your partner to read and tell them that if you behave like the husband in this book, I will leave you. I will take the baby and I will leave you. Tell them that. Because there are a few things in this book. Okay, parenting advice time here. No, don't worry. All I'm going to say is that before you have a child, sit down with the person that you are having this child with and discuss a few basic expectations. Make a plan. And the second thing is, paternity leave is important. If paternity leave is not an option, then you have to make sure, both of you have to make sure, this is not the mother's sole responsibility. You have to make sure that the father gets some alone time with the baby from the start. And believe me, this is difficult, but necessary. When you carry a child inside you, when you give birth, when you breastfeed, any one and all of those things create chemical changes, hormonal changes that allow you to bond with your newborn. The person who doesn't do any of this will not have the same physical and instinctual changes there at birth. But if I remember the research correctly, they can still gain this bond, including some chemical changes in the brain. You do this quite simply by spending time with your baby. Skin-on-skin contact is crucial for the baby's well-being and development, and it will also help you bond with the baby, because our bodies are weird and wonderful that way. So for the person who is not the primary caretaker, it is very important that they are present. Nobody knows automatically how to take care of a newborn. Nobody can change a newborn perfectly without incident, without chaos on the first go. Do this together, and also Well, for the first few weeks at least, even leaving the same room that your newborn is in can feel like there's an elastic band that is painfully stretched out and is really trying to just snap you back. Even so, go for a walk. Let your partner look after the baby for a little bit. Let them do it alone without you hovering over them. Now, why do I say all of this? I say that because in Soldier Sailor, you have a mother whose baby brain and sleep deprivation has made her not quite rational. And yet she puts up a facade where she only sends a picture of the baby being cute and everything being fine, even though nothing is fine. And she has a partner who only just works all the time, takes no interest in the baby, is a little bit concerned about his wife and how she looks very tired, and maybe she should get out a bit more and talk to people, and who doesn't understand how difficult that is with a newborn because he doesn't try it. Because clearly he has had no paternity leave, and clearly he has also not been present while his wife figures out how to take care of the newborn. And they don't do any of this together. When she does ask him for help, he has no clue what to do, to the point where it's actually weaponized incompetence. And there was a time where I felt like screaming at the book, stop facilitating this. You are enabling him. But also, if that was my guy, no way. I mean, if nothing else worked, I would phone his mother and complain. If any son of mine acts the way this man does, I would want my future potential daughter-in-law to phone me and complain, and I'll take them in hand. Because seriously, I hope I raised them better than that. Okay, that was an aside, but that man really annoyed me. But also the main character kind of annoyed me. I have not scripted this video, and I'm now a little bit lost as to what I've actually mentioned and what I meant to say and what I have left to say about the book. Let's just say that this book was an experience. And it wasn't really a negative one, it was just an intense one. And I think, obviously, your experience of the book will differ a bit based on whether you have a child or not. I can't really predict how somebody who doesn't want children will react to this book, or somebody who doesn't have children but would like children. But yeah, this was different, maybe even unique, and it would surprise me if this one doesn't end up on the shortlist. I have no idea if I said all the things that I actually wanted to say. Clearly I have feelings about this book. But let's just move on. Okay, so the third and final book that I want to talk about is The Maiden by Kate Foster. Now, this is historical fiction, loosely based or more inspired by a real murder that took place in the late 1600s. I think we're talking 1670s, 80s, 1678 to 79. Now, in this book, we have a murder victim who it is clear from the start is a total cad and a sleazebag, and the only surprise is that he didn't get murdered sooner. Although maybe not that much of a surprise, because he is also very charming when he wants to be, and he is also a powerful man. There are two suspects in the murder case, but only one of them is put on trial. And reading the book, I didn't so much wonder which one of them actually murdered him. It's not clear from the start which one it was or what happened. But I couldn't really muster that much interest in which one it was. What I did wonder about was why the authorities had decided to put on trial the highborn wife of a successful merchant who was also a relative of the murdered man, instead of let's call her woman of ill repute, because that's not generally how the world works. So that was a bit of mystery, and that was cleared up. And you also do find out what actually happened. But it does take a long while to get there. Basically, what Kate Foster has done is taken a murder case and a few notices about that, or newspaper clippings, and she has created an entire cast of supporting characters and just imagined a story of how did this happen and why. Which is why I say that it's just loosely inspired by a real case. The reason why it's called the Maiden, by the way, when there are very few maidens in this book, is that the guillotine that you can kind of vaguely see behind all the weirdly placed flowers was actually known as the Maiden. And that was the means of execution that they brought out for highborn people. Now, the book starts with a trial, and you're wondering, will she be found guilty? Will she somehow escape the guillotine? What will happen? And also, what did happen? And then it's the long slog towards the actual murder, with the occasional chapter about the trial and what happens after. And I do understand that there was a lot of backstory to put in place, but some of the important sort of reveals in that backstory don't actually occur until much later, or rather they are not revealed until much later. And I think it took just a little bit too long to get to the point. So I was actually a bit bored in the first half of this book. After that, things proceed quickly, and I was a lot less bored. Now, I have to say that I am not the biggest fan of historical fiction, and this is also not my favorite period of time. Mostly what I took from this was another, yep, I am glad I wasn't born then. And also, really, Scotland, your church and like church people back then? Whoa. The ways that the church had for publicly punishing and humiliating people. And there's a reverend in here that is a really foul, bigoted creature, and I'm kind of sad that he didn't get himself murdered too. So, what can I say? Even taking into consideration that I am not the biggest historical fiction fan, I think from what I've heard, this book is like everywhere in Scotland. It's really like promoted as the next big thing. And I just get the feeling that, yeah, this being on the long list gives it a bigger reach. And it kind of feels a bit like somebody decided that this is going to be a bestseller and this is how we make it a bestseller. I don't want to accuse the Women's Prize judges of anything like that. But this was fine. This was, I don't know, good even, but was it Women's Prize good? That means that I am halfway through the list, because I have previously done a video on Western Lane, The Wren, and Restless Dolly Monde. And then I did a video on Brotherless Night and Night Bloom. And now these 3 books. So that's halfway through the list. And so far I have 2 favorites, Brotherless Night and Soldier Sailor. I wouldn't be unduly surprised if The Wren makes the shortlist. It leaves a lot of space on the shortlist. So, hopefully there will be a lot of good books in the remaining 8. That's kind of good though. It would be sad if I read all my favorites first and then had a string of so-so books. It's good to have them mixed in a bit. Anyway, shortlist time is approaching, so I must go back to reading if I am to get this done. Full steam ahead. So I will be back very shortly to talk about Karen Lord. And until then, Thank you for watching. If you stayed with me this far in the video, my apologies for rambling, but you know, why not go a bit stream of consciousness when you review a stream of consciousness book? Happy reading, and I will be back very soon.